Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time and attention and wanting to learn something new. Today, I am and myself and Vanessa DeRosa are going to be talking about sexuality and providing resources to youth. So we're going to get the show on the road. I do have some things that I always start my presentations with, just because I feel like it is a good base for us to understand where information is coming from. First off, hello, my name is Ruth Delpito, in case anybody doesn't know. I'm with the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I'm the Mercer County Grant Program Coordinator. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, and American Studies. I'm certified in teaching English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership. All right, Vanessa.
Hi, my name is Vanessa DeRosa, and I'm prevention educator at Mercer Council, and I'm the Protecting You, Protecting Me program coordinator, and I have my bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in social work.
All right, so I also start my presentations, any presentation with this, just so that we can understand where the sentiment is coming from. One, this is not to scare you. Some of these numbers may be a little scary. They may be a little bit hard to digest, but these are good numbers for us to know, so we know where to put in the resources. Second thing is, this is to inform you. All the stuff that we have is information. This is education in its own right. So whatever you can take away is what you can take away. This is also not a parenting class. This is just for anyone that works with youth in general, hence the name Empowering Youth. And if you are a parent, know that you're the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've probably known them longer than they've known themselves. Perspectives. Anytime we do a presentation, myself or with a coworker of mine, our perspectives are shaped by our approaches and our learning experiences and what we use to navigate our prevention education world. And then we put those presentations and those resources into what we feel is best for that presentation or that event. So also, this is evidence informed and some evidence based. Evidence informed meaning any sort of program that we work with, life skills, Too Good for Drugs, footprints, Protecting You, Protecting Me, all of those things inform what we do and the baseline for our presentations. But also in terms of evidence-based, we have resources, we have numbers, we have surveys. All of those things are empirical and founded and quantitative and qualitative in their own right. So all of those things are culminated into hopefully a good and well-rounded presentation for you to enjoy. So we're going to be starting with this.
A person in the box.
Person in a box. There we go. All right. So Vanessa, take it away.
Sure. Okay. And yeah, before we get started with the slide, I just want to spend a second on saying that I'm looking forward to doing this presentation with Ruth today. This topic is very dear to me and resonates with me, being that I'm part of the LGBTQ plus population. I'm identify as a lesbian female. And so I just wanted to preface with that and also say that I learned a lot during my research for this presentation today. I came out when I was 30, so I'm 36 now, so 6 years ago. And so I didn't come out as a teenager. And so in providing, looking up the research and looking up the information for today, it was interesting to see about, the issues that LGBTQ youth face today. And in saying that everyone's journey to self-discovery is different. Everyone comes to their own at their own time and their own pace and in their own safe space. So I just wanted to start with all that. And again, look forward to providing the information today. Okay, so starting with the picture of the person in the box. Personally, I would be wearing more colorful socks than just pure white. But this person, okay, so we'll explain why I chose this image of the person in the box. So adolescence, okay, is a time of questioning, which is a natural process. So teens during this time may find themselves attracted to both sexes or none at all. So I included this picture to emphasize that adolescence is a time where teens don't necessarily want to be put in a box because they don't always see themselves represented in traditional categories such as being straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual. And then clicking the picture to the right, these were taken from the Trevor Project national survey on LGBTQ mental health, which we'll be talking about a little bit later in today's presentation. And so this image to the right just refers to just some of the many terms, there's over 100 to be exact, that LGBTQ plus youth use to identify their sexual identity.
Oh, also, I did want to point out that when you sort of have a lot of people, especially experimenting with the way that they feel about their sexuality and gender, what youth in terms of especially Gen Z today, they adapt to a lot of labels for us to sort of navigate through. And it can be confusing for adults that have grown up in a more structured label system, and for them to sort of point out and say, well, that's that and that's this. So when youth are experimenting, especially when they identify with one thing, understanding that they may identify as, bisexual one day and then decide, actually, no, I'm gay today. These are the things that, if no matter what it is, to honor them and give each label the same energy and the same support, regardless of what that looks like, so that they can navigate through their labels and finally discover one that works best for them. So that was my 2 cents about that. And also, whatever fits them better is what fits them better. And then we move on from there and we accept them as they are. So here we go. Next one. Trevor Project. Oh, I'm so excited to talk about this. All right, Vanessa.
Okay, I'm sure. So first off, the Trevor Project is a leading national organization and provides crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people under age 25. And so yeah, I just wanted to go through just the basic introduction to the survey. And it's great too, because it's very recent, 2020. So, okay, so this survey represents over 40,000 LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24 across the United States. It's the largest survey of LGBTQ youth mental health ever recorded. It consists of 4,000 Hispanic, Latinx, LGBTQ youth, over 1,500 Black, African-American LGBTQ youth, over 1,500 Asian Pacific Islander LGBTQ youth, and over 500 American Indian, Alaskan Native LGBTQ youth.
Just to cut in quickly. So I just recently did a presentation on First Nation peoples and Native Americans and substance use disorders. So for this number to be present within the 40,000 LGBTQ youth that have been surveyed is a huge undertaking, because access and those resources to those populations is minute at best. So for us to understand that this survey is a great representation of what resources needed and what the mental health of this population looks like. So kudos to the Trevor Project for looking through these numbers.
Yeah, it provides a whole slew of insights into suicide and mental health, conversion therapy, change attempts, discrimination, physical harm, housing instability, supporting transgender and non-binary youth, finding support, diversity of gender identity and sexual orientation, and research and methodology. So the survey definitely emphasizes the importance of safe spaces and social support in positively impacting the wellness of LGBTQ plus youth.
Most definitely. And I also think that a lot of the time when people put LGBT together, for us to understand that gender identity and sexual preferences are 2 different things that can coincide with each other. Sexual identity is something that we feel within ourselves, or something that we externally feel attraction towards other people. And then gender identity is internal. So a lot of the time I've had someone explain it to me best when they said, think of it like a pair of socks or mismatched socks, where you have oh yes, we will be sending the link to the survey results, absolutely. So when you're sort of looking at socks in general, you're just like, well, these can match up, or you can have a fun pair of socks on this side and a white sock on this side. So regardless of what that looks like, what normalcy may look like, we don't have to have a white pair of socks. We can have whatever color we want. And I think that's really important for us to recognize that sometimes it lines up in a way that would make sense or would be normal, but other times people identify in various ways, and that's just for them to figure out and for us to be comfortable with. So, all right. Also moving on with the key findings, which are very interesting. Vanessa?
Sure. So yeah, so the key findings, so 40% of LGBTQ respondents seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months, with more than half of transgender and non-binary youth having seriously considered suicide. So just want to stop there and provide the definition for what transgender means and non-binary. So transgender is relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. And then non-binary means someone whose gender identity isn't exclusively male or female. So it's important to ask them what being non-binary means to them. Some people who are non-binary experience their gender as both male and female, and others experience their gender as neither male or female. So just wanted to provide what those two terms mean. And it's interesting too, because going along with this first point here, transgender and non-binary youth who reported having their pronouns respected by all or most people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not have their pronouns respected. So that goes definitely with the first point, and just wanted to provide that additional information.
So is it also with pronouns and chosen name, I believe? So I don't think I think it was definitely pronouns, and also whatever name they had chosen outside of their like new identity that they wanted to identify as.
Great, okay. And then, so the second point, 68% of LGBTQ youth reported symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder in the past 2 weeks, including more than 3 in 4 transgender and non-binary youth. 55% of LGBTQ youth reported symptoms of major depressive disorder in the past 2 weeks, including more than 2 in 3 transgender and non-binary youth. And then 40, I believe that's 48%.
46, I think.
46%, sorry. 46% of LGBTQ youth report they wanted psychological or emotional counseling from a mental health facility. I'm sorry, mental health professional, but were unable to receive it in the last 12 months.
Which is a lot. So if anybody is wondering more about gender identity and substance use disorder, or gender identity and mental health, I just recently did a presentation on gender identity and SUD. So I will also link that presentation below once this is published on the YouTube channel. And what we are looking for is that what Vanessa had sort of laid out for us is for us to understand that when identities are respected, when they're acknowledged, when they are given the resources to be authentically themselves, then the risk for a lot of harmful things can be dramatically reduced if we are able to provide those resources.
Yeah, so and then, yeah, definitely. And the survey also highlights the need for more research, for systematic data collection, and more comprehensive mental health support.
Yeah, and if anybody has any trouble with some of the nuances of the definitions, for my gender identity presentation, I sort of break down more of what non-binary, transgender, transsexual, all of those terms mean. So those resources will also be listed in this presentation as well. All right, moving on.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, so here are some positives that were taken from the finding support section in the survey. So 78% of LGBTQ youth report having access to at least one in-person LGBTQ affirming space. 86% of LGBTQ youth report having high levels of support from at least one person. And then over 80% of youth who said that celebrities who are LGBTQ positively impact how they feel about being LGBTQ. And then more than half of youth said brands who support the LGBTQ community positively impact how they feel about being LGBTQ. So I included 3 images at the bottom. So the first image on the left is a tweet that was sent out from the Oreo company. And the tweet says that trans people exist. And now this tweet came the same day as the House of Representatives passed the Equality Act, which amends the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include protection of sexual orientation and identity. And the last I checked, I wanted to see the status of that, and it still needs to be cleared from the Senate. So I just wanted to point that out. And then the middle image, Burger King, the logo for Burger King. So Burger King will make a donation to the Human Rights Campaign for every chicken sandwich sold off their menu during Pride Month. So the chain will contribute 40 cents per chicken sandwich sold, and with a maximum donation of 250,000. So that's just an example about of a brand who supports the LGBTQ plus community. And then the image to the right is Demi Lovato. And Demi Lovato recently identified as with the pronouns of they and them. And they is a very inspirational figure in the LGBTQ plus community. So wanted to include Demi on this slide. Ruth, do you have anything to add for that?
I love the fact that we are able to sort of look at something that would normally be just, you buy Oreos, you buy Burger King, but it's not just lip service when they're really looking at the mental health of LGBTQIA youth, and also to sort of mitigate some of these things. So these are really important numbers for us to look at, especially when we're looking at finding support. And I will also link another presentation below that I did on ACEs, and I have talked ad nauseum about it, but it's always good to use it to inform how we navigate the world for our youth and how we help them navigate their world and their environment. Because ACEs in general, what the study had also found was that, and I will also link that presentation below in case anybody is lost, but what they had found was that any risk factor that somebody may have, a mitigating factor is also present and can actually cancel out that adverse childhood experience. So let's say, for example, being LGBTQIA plus in a community that doesn't really accept that individual, if you have someone that is affirming in their sexuality, in their gender identity, and giving them high levels of support in any capacity that they can, that actually mitigates a lot of that trauma that adverse childhood experience would bring. So that in itself is something that I think is such a valiant part of supporting children in this community. So I'm just really excited to see where the rest of this support takes the youth, and how we can sort of move on to bigger and better things and policy that actually works for their mental health. So I'm going to be talking about social media. How can it help? So I have quite a few different things I would like to say about this, because one, social media is a very important part of the socialization of Generation Z, just in general. And this is not something that we can get away from. It's something that almost every Gen Z is a part of. And so we're going to drink the Kool-Aid, and we're going to dive in and see how we can see the trends helping LGBTQIA youth, rather than talking about the way social media can hurt. So there are a couple of things we have here. And what we had found is that the Washington Post recently had published something on the GLAAD survey. So it's just an article. I can click on it, and then you can sort of see what that looks like. But what it basically does, and it would basically say, excuse me, Mr. Advertisement, what it basically does is it talks about the importance of social media and LGBTQIA kids feeling seen and heard in these communities where you have social media and informing and LGBTQIA inclusion. So what they had found was that GLAAD, if anybody doesn't know what GLAAD is, my apologies for not exactly knowing what the acronym stands for, but I believe it's the Gay, Lesbian, something association, something. My apologies. I am so sorry. But everyone knows what GLAAD is. And it basically helps with LGBTQIA youth and inclusion in general for the LGBT community. And what they had done was a survey in 2017 and 2018, an annual report on where we are on TV. And it was and I'm going to read this now. So it was a broadcast television, showed programs with 58 regular characters who identified as LGBTQIA plus in whatever capacity. This number represented 6.4% of all 901 regularly occurring characters, and 17 transgender roles were portrayed across broadcast, cable, and streaming television services. GLAAD reported that 4 of those 17 were non-binary characters. Now, what these numbers suggest, and what we sort of can look at and pull from, is one, representation matters. That if you have complex characters that actually see and show that these people are being heard, their experiences are being fleshed out in ways that are good in the community and that drive the plot forward and are complicated characters that make it a whole person that they can identify with, then that means that LGBTQIA youth are being seen in a way that is different than usual. And it's not just for LGBTQIA youth for them to feel represented. It's that for heterosexual and straight youth, for them to see that LGBTQIA youth are as complex as they are, and their identities are just as valid as theirs is. So it does play a huge role in the way that people look at it. So there was also another study done by the University of Toronto. It is an exhaustive study, and if you want to take the time, go ahead. More power to you. I did go through it, and there were quite a few different things there. But what they had found was that they looked at the use of social media and how LGBTQI youth were affected through social media use. And what they had found, and it weren't necessarily a lot of conclusive evidence because this was definitely preliminary, but what they had found was that the first intention of people engaging in social media was the way that people had navigated their environment. So what I mean by this is if you had an LGBTQI youth start navigating through their social media because they wanted to find a community to belong to, that had a very positive impact on the way that they felt about themselves and the way that they felt about their community. Now, obviously, you can say that social media can be hard because you find a lot of bullying online. You find a lot of communities that may not necessarily be risk mitigating, but these were parts that were really interesting. And for us to understand that just because it's preliminary, it doesn't mean it's not valid. And that LGBTQIA youth did feel seen, they did feel heard, and they were able to actually feel engaged in a community when they felt that there were outliers not accepting them in their own communities. So that is a great study to cite if people are looking at some preliminary research. Also, we have the infamous or famous, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, TikTok. So I actually look because I think that TikTok is a big socialization aspect of Generation Z. And I typed in the tag LGBT on TikTok. Now, mind you, this is just the tag LGBT. This is also not the tag. There's another one that I actually love the name of. It's called Alphabet Mafia. And quite frankly, I just find it fascinating because I'm like, that's just a great identity for people to have. And they identify it to have like a lot of inclusion in the way that they do their TikToks as well. So this, when I first saw it, was at view count. This was on Monday, 115.1 billion views. Now, billion. All right, let's see how much it has now. This is from Monday. Now we have 118.5 billion views on TikTok. Now, these are great for a lot of reasons. LGBT obviously doesn't mean that everyone that makes the TikTok will be inclusive in the community, but a good majority of people that are making these TikToks are doing it to feel included, are doing it to show their lifestyle and what they do and how they navigate their sexuality and gender identity. So these are really good things. And that shows that people are using and engaging in this app for them to feel included in some capacity and for them to have engaging conversations. And mind you, this is just for this tag. That doesn't mean there are not other tags that are also gender and sexual identity inclusive. So I find that fascinating in my personal opinion. And we move on and we move forward from here. So Vanessa, take it away.
So in this slide is discussing the process of discovering sexual orientation. So it can start with fantasies or dreams when a person realizes they are attracted to someone of the same gender, with the feeling that they are different from friends and classmates, and or with a sexual experience.
So when we're sort of looking at discovering sexual orientation, I also would like to say that there may be, this is definitely not an exhaustive list, I would say, but also for people to understand that there's a lot of nuance when it comes to sexual identity and gender identity. So for people to sort of step back and say, well, if you haven't had those things, does that mean that you're a certain type of way? Not really. So for us to understand that this is not an exhaustive list, but also there could definitely be other things for people to know when their sexual orientation has sort of changed, or they're sort of discovering it on their own.
Good point. Yeah.
So I actually love talking about Gen Z for a lot of reasons, but what I find fascinating is that the LGBTQI youth of today are different than a few generations ago. Excuse me. And it's not because there are more gay or LGBTQIA plus youth. It's that people are using their identities and they're identifying earlier. That doesn't mean that there are more LGBTQIA people in the world. It just means that people are now identifying earlier at earlier rates and actually affirming their gender and sexuality much earlier on than the generation before them and the generation before them. They are different today for a lot of reasons, but what I find fascinating is that there was this study that was done on substance use, and for us to understand that while things are changing, there's more accessibility. Today's LGBTQI youth are 2 to 4 times more likely to struggle with substance abuse. So this is something for us to keep in mind. And what the studies had basically found was that substance use and substance abuse in general is a coping skill. It's not something that LGBTQIA people are more inherently going to do, but it just means that it is a coping skill, meaning whatever realities that person may face, they are going to use substances if they are not given the right skills to cope with their trauma and their harsh realities. So that is something to keep in mind. Also, to understand that this is just LGBTQIA youth. This does not talk about Black and Brown LGBTQIA youth. This does not talk about communities of color of LGBTQIA youth. So this is just preliminary numbers on talking about people who identify with LGBTQIA, but not necessarily talking about the cross-sectionalism and the intersectionality of those identities. So the numbers could definitely be higher. I know for a fact First Nation and Native American people on reservations have a life expectancy of 50 years old. So if we take that into account, if you have an LGBTQIA youth on a reservation versus an LGBTQIA youth in a more accepting home in a suburb, those realities look different. The next thing is also understanding that Generation Z is, and I've definitely heard headlines before, and I will link some news articles below that say the Generation Z is the gayest generation we've had. And, you can say, I sort of smirk at that for a lot of reasons, because that doesn't mean that they are, it just means that they know who they are sooner. And this is some interesting stuff because Generation Z is about 2/3 heterosexual, which means about 33% of Generation Z is LGBTQIA plus. That is the biggest numbers we've had in a very, very long time. Now, what I also would like to let people know is that LGBTQIA youth are much more politically involved and much more vocal about their rights and their wants and needs because they are being encouraged by social media. And obviously, there are some falters along the way where people navigate it and they may say or do the wrong things. But that's with any sort of activism, for people to sort of use the movements, use the spaces for them to move forward in a way that makes sense to them. So also to understand that LGBTQI youth are engaged in a different way than they were in the past, where because they're more open, because they're owning their identities, they are much more politically involved. We have younger people every day making their voices known that this is how they want to be treated and this is how they think society should look. So that is also something for us to keep in mind as we move forward. So I think that it's a good thing for us to understand, and for also for us to understand that when we're talking to people who are younger, they may already know exactly who they are, at least in those moments. So it's not something as if we have to tell them everything, but we just have to be there while they exist and while they navigate their own environment. All right, Vanessa.
Okay, sure. Okay, so this slide will cover information regarding the feelings of uncertainty, and they can be made worse by the following. So number one, the social stigma that can come with being non-heterosexual. And I know that was presented on the last slide too. And the whole idea with the heterosexism that exists. So that means that the assumption that all people are or should be heterosexual. So it's known as the majority culture habit. And I know I've experienced this very regularly. For instance, the other day, my spouse and I were moving, and I went to the post office and requested a change of address kit. And right away, the person working at the post office asked what my husband's last name is, and for, with doing the kit. So I encounter that quite regularly, and that just wanted to share with you because that, plays into that whole heterosexism ideology. And yeah, so just for, to be aware of that. And so that goes with the first point. And then the second point, a lack of knowledge. So feelings of uncertainty can be made worse by a lack of knowledge, a fear of how friends and family might react, a fear of being rejected by friends and family, a lack of non-heterosexual role models, or having few opportunities to socialize with other teens with similar feelings. And so I put the picture on the right, and you see it looks like a bunch of girls at a sleepover. And I put that because friends can be a strong source of support for their questioning peers, but interacting with other teens who don't share the same internal struggle can sometimes feel isolating for adolescents. So this whole picture shows the whole ideology of when a questioning youth doesn't know, but all the others know. So they don't know. Wait, I'm sorry, but when you don't know, but others know. In terms of with the group of girls, one could say maybe they're like gossiping about, their boy crazy, and they're gossiping. And for a questioning youth, they could feel that isolation, they could feel isolated, and they could feel like internal angst because they're not sure, but then others around them know about their, with their sexual orientation. So.
I always sort of, excuse me, look at it as sort of a different way of just an assumption. Heterosexism and the heteronormativity is just an assumption that people are like that, or that people function the way that they do. And I think that what we could do to mitigate a lot of the social ailments that we have is to understand that people just have different realities than we do, and to not make assumptions about those things does less to erase the validity of people's identities. So for everyone to keep that in mind when people move forward, it's definitely a big part of that too. And we're going to be talking about on the next slide, excuse me, a fear of being rejected by friends and family, but we're going to sort of be talking about it in a different way. Why are LGBTQ youth so much more at risk? And this does play back into the previous slide, where there's definitely a social stigma. There definitely could be policies that take away their rights, depending on what state they're in. Organizations that maybe unspecialize in the needs of their communities. So for example, if you are going to a place that is for substance use disorders, but they don't necessarily treat maybe the gender dysphoria that a transgender and non-binary person would have, that doesn't help the substance use disorder because it doesn't mitigate the feelings of that coping skill in general. Because coping skills and substance use is just a maladaptive coping skill. That's all it is. So when we sort of address the issues alongside the substance use disorder, then we have better results. So the dichotomy of both is a very important part of anyone with an identity that is marginalized. Also, generations prior made spaces for socializing. This may be, for example, if you're gay, you go to a gay bar. So when you are of the LGBTQIA community, there definitely should be more spaces for those youth to interact, so that they don't necessarily turn to spaces that encourage substance use in general. Also, the avenues for acceptance are pervasively around riskier socialization. So historically, people may have engaged in physical intimacy very quickly because they had no time to get to know one another. I know, especially because I am also part of the LGBTQIA community, I have a lot of friends who identify as lesbian, and they have this misnomer that you move in after knowing each other for 2 weeks, because there's sort of like this hyper awareness that like you want to get to know that person so quickly. And I think it's just because of past traumas, in my opinion, but also understanding that people of the LGBTQIA community have a social stigma, and they feel the need to connect with each other more. So to give them those spaces without having anything else in the mix is a much healthier option for them. Also, social media can be a great place where you connect to others, people like them online. I have already talked about this before, but this is also something for us to know. Also, risky socialization. I also want to say that this may be more for the older youth, but also dating apps can be good. They can be bad depending on where you fall and what you use it for. There are quite a few different apps where, such as like Tinder, where people use it, and there's definitely a stigma around those dating apps. So, what kind of socialization do people engage in can also be part of that, and why the risk could be so much greater. Now, I also want to talk about LGBTQIA youth finding comfort in drugs. And we're just going to put this out there because it is something that should be addressed. Got some numbers coming your way.
What does LGBT means? The specific acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Many LGBT youth are suffering from self-esteem and identity issues. Youths are at an age at which everything is changing, their brains are developing, they are maturing and questioning their sexual identity. LGBT youths experiences violence that includes bullying, teasing, harassment, physical assault, and suicide-related behavior. They often experience emotional challenges such as rejection and isolation surrounding the process of coming out, fears of physical violence, prejudice and discrimination. The lack of social acceptance that LGBT youth experience can lead to a dangerous behavior to which they found comfort on alcohol, marijuana and other illicit drugs including cocaine. According to data from Youth Risk Behavior Surveys or YRBS, conducted during 2001 to 2009, in 7 states and 6 large urban school districts, 12% to 28% of LGBT youths were threatened or injured by other youths in the prior years. 200% of LGBT youths are more likely to use illicit drugs than heterosexual youths. All youth, whether heterosexual or LGBT, deserves to be given support, acceptance, and effective drug use prevention education. The fight against LGBT substance abuse will be a difficult challenge, but with the help of their family, friends, and the society, there is still a chance. When LGBT youth feel safe and supported, sometimes for the first time in their lives, they can make significant strides during their treatment. What would happen if society stops rejections to LGBT? Would this prevent them from taking comfort on drugs?
I thought that was a cute, physical representation of what we can sort of look through. Yeah, so I think that video is good for a lot of reasons, but for us to understand that the numbers are there, but the numbers can only mean so much. So when we have more in-person and individual understanding of what people are going through, that can definitely ratify some of those experiences and needs to engage in drugs and alcohol. All right, moving forward, Vanessa.
Okay, so these are ways that you can help your teen if you think that they are questioning their sexuality or has just come out to you. Number 1, love and support them. Let your teen know that they are loved no matter what their sexual orientation is. Wait until they're ready to talk. Some people are not ready to announce their sexual orientation until they are adults. Some teens will tell a sibling, cousin, or friend before they tell a parent. Recognize their courage in speaking out. Be open-minded, avoid judgment and blame. Continue to do what you've always done together. And ask what they need from you. They may just want you to listen and be positive.
I'd also add to that, leading by example could be a good one as well. So even if not necessarily if you identify as LGBTQIA, But if the LGBTQIA youth is surrounded by people who use substances in a harmful way, that definitely heightens the risk of them turning to substances that could hurt them and having more likelihood of not getting help for their mental health. So that's one thing. Also being involved in their lives, as we've sort of said before, continue to do what you've always done together, and also use language that is not harmful to any marginalized group, because you don't know what your kids identify as. So if you are in a classroom, or if you're in a family setting, if you're at a family barbecue, make sure that what the language you use is something that is comforting, inclusive, and not necessarily harmful to any identity your child could be identifying as. Also understand that the words that we use are direct translations of what we think in our head. So there are different connotations to the word choices that we have. So being careful of those connotations and of those word choices can definitely help mitigate some harm as well. All right. Vanessa?
Okay, so
Yeah.
here is the so here is the resource list, prevention resources, and yes, some resources that we provide to you.
We've
And
also
including
worked
the
with some
Trevor
of these
Project.
people.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. We've also worked with some of these organizations before. So it's not as if they're, out in the world and we haven't necessarily sort of test run their participation and what they've done. So we have worked with quite a few different organizations, or have at least touched base with some of them. So the resources and the research that they use is very important to the LGBTQIA community, especially in New Jersey, where our youth are and what the youth that we serve. So this list will also be at the end of, or in the list of the presentation at the end, where I do all the description-y stuff. So you will have that, and you will definitely have all the resources that you've been asking for. Anything to add, Vanessa?
Nope.
Okay, so we also have another slide for resources as well. This is great. Vanessa, can you talk about the Pride Toolkit for a second?
Yeah, sure. I attended a webinar the other day hosted by Partners in Prevention. And so by visiting the website, the link below, you can register and download a free Pride Toolkit. And I just included what that has. It's really interesting too, because a couple bullet points down where it says Youth Activities Workbook. So I provide PYPM to students in grades K through 5. And this Youth Activity Workbook is for the K through 5 population, and it has a matching game, a word search, and it's all developmentally appropriate, kid friendly, and vocab as well. So and coloring pages. So it was really neat to see, and I definitely saved it in my resource list for future use with the students.
Super cool, super awesome that exists in the first place. So really excited to have those resources there. So I would also, I do like to end on quotes. Vanessa has something she would like to share after this as well. So we're going to be doing this and then Vanessa's thing. So quotes to end on. I actually have a friend who is going through a hard time with her family, and they are not necessarily super accepting of her sexuality. So she usually uses these two quotes to get through the day, which I find quite enjoyable. One is, "Openness may not completely disarm prejudice, but it's a good place to start," by Jason Collins, who's an LGBTQ icon. And also, if Harry Potter taught us anything, it's that no one should live in a closet. Which I find both hilarious and definitely true. So I would like to end my sort of spiel and my soapbox with: give children the space to come out to you in the first place. Be an open and safe person, and also be open to the possibility of being a safe space for them. So you don't know the children you work with. Maybe some of them have you don't know what their sexuality or gender identity is at the time. You will be raising kids. They could be your own kids, raising them, and one day they're like, "Hey, mom, dad, or whoever, I'm gay, or I'm bisexual," or whatever it is. And to know that you don't know what your children are going to be like, or what the children in your classroom are like, until you engage with them and until they feel comfortable to come to you about those parts of their identity. So just be a safe space for them and be that for them as well. And it can be healthy for them to have people who understand them in a very different way than what they're used to. And before I referred to the ACEs and the mitigating risk factors and all the things of the such. But I just want to close with that. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Vanessa, take it away.
Sure. Yeah. And I love these quotes too that you included. Yes, I just wanted to share. So as I previously stated, I came out when I was 30. I knew in college though, but I just kept it suppressed and didn't feel comfortable coming out until I hit the 30 mark. So when I came out to my parents, it was extremely hard. My mom didn't take it so well, and I told her first. And so that kind of made me very scared to tell my dad. I have a close relationship with both my parents, but just coming out to my mom and her reaction just didn't make me want to tell my dad. I was just scared. But I got the courage and I did come out to him. And a few days after I came out to him, and at that time my parents were divorced, so he wasn't living in the home with my mom and I. A few days later, I got this card in the mail, and I just wanted to share it with you because it's very uplifting, inspirational, and I just would like to share it as it was a major source of strength for me, and may it be a source of strength for others too. So I'll read it to you. So it says, being true to yourself is a pretty big deal. It's not about perfect, it's more about real. It's not about falling, it's learning to fly. It's asking why not when others ask why. It's not the arriving, it's more in the going. A lifelong adventure, becoming and growing. It's all about genuine, honest, and true. It's being amazing by just being you. I'm like getting choked up because I love my dad. He's awesome. And so I definitely, read it. I keep it close and read it from time to time. And it just helped me so much. And I just appreciate my dad so much. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you.
Thank you for sharing, Vanessa. I think that's also beautiful. The authenticity that people can be, and for us to honor that is such an important part of people's coming out experience. So thank you for that. Really appreciate your openness. So that is it for this presentation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking around, and we have all the resources here, by the way. So it's an exhaustive list, I promise you. So you'll have a lot to sift through, but it's all good work that we do. So I'm super excited to see what that looks like from now on. So we are done for now. And next week, we'll be talking about words mattering. And what I mean by that is the word choice that we use actually does affect the way people in general perceive themselves. And we'll be talking about that more. I touch upon LGBTQI youth, intersectionality, all of that stuff. So I'm really excited for next week because word choice is something that we don't necessarily pay attention to all the time. So putting emphasis on the things that we say and do are a truly important part of how we navigate with youth. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.